Welcome to episode 13. Check out what you can expect this week. So I get it when instructors tell me a discussion forum is not as good as the face-to-face environment. Josh, you threw me up on the soapbox, and I hope you're not sorry for it, because
no, I'm not. And I'm gonna role a little bit of interviewer here for a second. If you could suggest top 5 things to fix discussion, what would that be?
That's right, folks. Will here. Josh is with me. We're back again for another episode of High Tech. We're thrilled to have you along for the journey as always. We're having a lot of fun with the process, even just tonight, coming up with new ideas to make this a little bit more engaging and bring in some third parties. So I look forward to you getting to listen to some of those ideas as they come together. Now, tonight, we are going to be digging into... Where's my episode notes?
You did look it up, didn't you?
Oh, I did it.
You got it?
I did it. Oh, I did it.
What is it?
Discussions.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about discussions. And Josh and I have a couple of jokes from time to time of us not having our notes ready as we get going.
Yeah. Yeah. Surprise, guys. I'm not going to tell you which episodes it was, but we recorded 2 of them out of order because I started talking about the wrong episode and Will just ran with it. So You will never know. But there's an episode where Will was confused.
I was just sitting there like, what is he talking about?
And then I realized I screwed up. That's
But we made it work, and
we made it work.
It doesn't matter. We're the ones publishing the episodes. We get to choose the order.
You've no idea.
So tonight's not just discussions, right? It's not just like talking. We mean like the online discussion forum.
Discussions.
We're discussing talking. We're talking discussions.
We talked about the topic. Yes, we are discussing discussions, right? So what do we mean by discussions? Okay, let's clarify that here for a second, because I don't know who all's listening, the whole 7 people that could be listening to us.
It might be 8 by now.
We don't know. Who knows by now? We're predicting future. So we're talking about, right, this idea of discussion forums, okay? This is a thing in education now, especially in online and hybrid teaching. This idea of an online forum, right, where you usually put a prompt. Hopefully you put a prompt. I've seen some people use discussions and they don't put a prompt, which is a whole nother conversation. But put a prompt, right? Maybe it's tied to reading. Maybe it's tied to a video, tied to something, or maybe it's just a general prompt on something you've been learning about that week. And students discuss it, right? They drop in a post. They reply to each other's posts. Very social media-esque to what we're doing a little bit there. That's the basic use of it. I know there's a lot of different uses of how discussions work across different courses, but that's, I feel like, I think it's a good definition, kind of what we're talking about.
The typical one is post by Wednesday, reply by Sunday, rinse, repeat, right? Discussions are pretty flat in their typical design. And one of the exciting things that I think Josh and I have had the experience with in a couple different ways is that they don't have to be that way. We can make discussions, keeping them text-based, we can make them more fun. Because a lot of folks who I think I've talked to who say there's an issue with text-based online discussions, where it's just like, well, if it was only like the real classroom, or if we could just talk face-to-face, it would be fine, right? There's still an assumption there. There's still an assumption that the discussion happening face-to-face is valuable. I know I've been in discussions where they devolved into jokes.
Yeah.
Josh has witnessed some of those.
Yes, and I've maybe been a cause of a few of them, right? Or right, in face-to-face discussion type of talking, they're not perfect either. I mean, people can dominate conversations. That never happens, right? You never have that one student who's so opinionated and has come into your class already knowing everything that you're teaching.
Josh, you don't have to talk about yourself like that.
Oh, yeah, Yeah, I was that guy.
No.
In some cases probably was. I was an arrogant little jerk. Still am.
We all have to grow. It's fine.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah. That never happens, right? So that's I think sometimes we put on this rosy idea of what, because we're together, what face-to-face discussion is. That's not to say there's not value in that. That's not to say something's not lost in a digital discussion. Absolutely. It does not. I often see instructors treat discussions like it replaces the face-to-face thing.
Right.
Right? It's this is what we put into an online or a hybrid course to replace us not being together. And that's also not a great way to, I think, go into a discussion, because that's why it fails. It's not a replacement.
I know instructors who literally do Monday class, Wednesday class, Friday discussion forum. Yeah. Like that's that routine. And I think you're right. Like it's not the same. It doesn't do it. And Josh and I have had an episode out on, ed tech frameworks by now. So there's some consideration here. Like if you're just trying to replicate the physical experience in a digital context, then a discussion forum is not going to get it. You can't have people interrupt one another. You can't have people raise their hands easily. You can't have people that doesn't work in a text-based discussion.
There's also time between some of the responses. Now, it depends on how, we're going to be talking about something that relates to discussions tool-wise today, and there's a feature of it that goes with live discussion that in our tech integration idea transforms some of the idea of discussions, even face-to-face. But if we're talking traditionally what we reference to discussions, there is a difference there, right? There's time in between the responses. There's some difference to what you deal with. Now, I will comment to this as we're talking about discussions here. I'm interested in all of your thoughts on this because I know, I have a lot of thoughts about discussions. Mr. Will over here actually has spoken on it at South by Southwest, or at least a mini version because COVID canceled it, which I was supposed to be there.
Don't remind me.
Yeah, sorry. But you've talked about this a lot, right? Yeah. Into groups. This is actually something that you passionately care about to the extent that you've actually put a lot of thought into how this looks.
I'd say I have two primary areas of instructional design research focus, and the one is motivation and motivational theory. The other is discourse. I have spent a lot of time in this. I did a lot of research for that presentation, and I think that one of the things that's so important to discourse is the relational stuff that happens in the face-to-face experience. So I get it when instructors tell me a discussion forum is not as good as the face-to-face environment. When the value is community building, when the value is body language, I agree 100%. What I would say in a digital context then is, like we were just saying in our frameworks sense, we can't replicate that digitally. So we have to think about the value of engaging people in a discourse, someone talking and someone responding, someone asking a question and someone answering, right? Those experiences. We have to find the value in that and amplify it to be different in a digital context. It's probably always going to be a full transformation. And that's where I think some of my primary suggestions in digital discourse come together with logistics. It's how we deliver the thing. So think of when you're doing discussions, should the students all have to provide questions and all have to provide answers? Should there be roles? Is it free form? Everybody can do whatever they want to. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Should there be maybe something in a discussion context or a discussion forum context that is first community building, right? So maybe Monday there's this discussion where people are just sharing what they're interested about the subject this week. And then by Friday, there's a separate discussion where they're doing something more academic and more in-depth. The idea of just putting one forum out there, please, read and respond by Wednesday and 2 replies by Sunday, and expecting it to be good discourse is a failed attempt. I really don't see that working. I have a lot of faculty who've told me it doesn't work. I have personally experienced it in my community college, undergraduate, and master's degree studies. All 3 of them I've experienced the online digital discussion forum failing in that way. So I just come back to saying, what are we trying to cultivate? Okay, discourse. We actually want people to go back and forth with one another. Then we need to come up with some metrics, some logistics to help that be cultivated. Otherwise, this is a little bit from my talk, but I actually look back on the method that most people do use in discussion forums, and I call it not discussion, not discourse, but text-based analysis and response. T-bar. For me, it was always helpful to keep that in mind. T-bar, T-B-A-R. Text-based analysis and response is, I provide you several paragraphs of content, you analyze that and respond. That is not a discussion. That is not discourse. Actually, it's a lot like annotation. We've talked about that in a couple different episodes at this point here at High Tech, but annotation is I take some thoughts in, I process them, and then I respond with my thoughts. That is not discourse. That is I call it T-bar. You could just call it like peer review. You could call it exchanging papers. But I think it's still a good practice. I would just encourage folks to say, if that's what you're doing, it's not discourse, and don't try and put discourse-based parameters on something that's text-based analysis and response. If I'm telling the students, write 3 paragraphs, send it to a colleague, and then you have to give some questions back or something like that, do not require them to do that the same day. Do not require them to have a 50-word limit or a 250-word limit. Like, that should be, do your paragraphs worth of work and do it in these 5 days worth of time. And don't bother them with, make sure you have 2 or 3 replies to every other poster in the thread. That's just that's trying to take a discursive model, a discourse related content, and put it into exchanging papers, which I think is a different practice. Josh, you threw me up on the soapbox, and I hope you're not sorry for it, because
I'm not. And here's I'm gonna play role a little bit of interviewer here for a second, right? Because you and I've talked about this a little bit, but I think one thing would be helpful, right, for those listening, and then I'll add my own thoughts into this, because I have my own thoughts about discussions that tie a lot to what Will's talking about. But one thing I'd love to throw in here, like, if you could suggest top 5 things to fix discussions, what would that be?
Number 1. he was ready. We did not prepare this, folks.
No, we did not.
He was ready for this, though. Number 1 would definitely be to acknowledge your assumptions. First and foremost, acknowledge your assumptions, okay? You're going to assume a discussion online should do something that you did previously in a physical experience. Acknowledge them. Number 2, deny them if you have to. Right? This is almost like grief counseling, but the first thing is to acknowledge what your assumptions are about discourse and what you want to happen in a digital space, and deny the ones that are not practical. Right? I think some of the ones that are not practical are related to time, related to frequency of posts, related to quantity of posts. If you are telling students in an online discussion board that they have to reply 10 times, I want to give you an F on your course. Like, I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't design it. I wouldn't, it's just not fun. And you're going to do that in a week's time. Now, if it's a single discussion forum, it goes across 2 weeks, and you want to ask them to post 10 times, great. But so step 1, acknowledge your assumptions. Step 2, deny them. Step 3, make your top list or identify your top list of things you want to cultivate, right? What do you want to cultivate? So if you're a course on humanities, you might want the students to be digging into the text and really pulling out the themes, the styles, connecting it to other thinkers and artists, etc. If that's what you want to cultivate, is a discussion the right choice for that? If it is the right choice for that, well, now we just need to kind of start to question ourselves, how much content do they need to interact with to prove that they understand that element? If you can get them to do that in 50 words, get them to do that in 50 words. That's actually a challenge itself. Giving student a page or 2 pages to kind of wax eloquent, make stuff up, and plagiarize is not helpful. If you can force them to do it in 50 words, to respond to the thoughts of, Franklin D. Roosevelt, or to, some of the autobiographies of Benjamin Franklin, for instance, if you could get them to paraphrase or cultivate that in shorter content, then everybody maybe makes an initial post that's very straightforward, very small, and you could get folks to then have conversation after the students have done that lead post. Focus less on your great prompts of here's my best question or my best top 5 questions you need to answer about this work, and force them to create that kind of content. Make them take a stance or make a statement about the content, and then have them all discuss each other's. That is discursive. The students can then go back and forth with each other, and the students are invested in their initial post, as opposed to them not caring about their response to your prompt. I think number 4 here is, you're not king or queen. You're not the key. Let's go with that. You're not the key.
Man, you're knocking this out. You're preaching it right now. We didn't even talk about 5 points beforehand. This is solid.
If you think in a discussion you're the key to it taking to its success, I think you need to go back to your assumptions about what was happening in the classroom. Even you are more like a traffic control in the classroom, right? As a student asks a question, you might answer it and redirect it, but you might hopefully, I hope you'd encourage other students to answer it first, right?
Yeah.
Oh, professor, when you said blah, blah, blah about Franklin D. Roosevelt's policy, what did you mean by that? Well, I just want to clarify one thing. I might have meant this, but does anybody else have an insight as to what they might say back to the student? That redirect is really how you build the community. The students start to learn from one another, but you're not the end all be all. You have the expertise and you're the one who should answer the question, but you want the students to be a part of it. And here's the flip side of this. Okay. I'm not speaking out both sides of my mouth. I'm very serious. You are the key. You are the key when it comes to the actual facilitation and development of the discussion. If you see some student's thread not going anywhere or nobody's replying to them, reply to them. If you see that the students are doing well with one another and you don't have to be engaged, maybe just jump in and say, this is a good discussion. You know, when we tell the students don't tell each other good job, that's because we don't want them thinking that counts as one of their 10 discussion posts, right? You should, though, be in there telling them when they're doing well. Reinforce the good things that they're doing and model for them the behaviors you want to see in professional peer review. That's what you would expect of a colleague looking over your paper. If it's good, tell them it's good. If it's not, help them learn to revise it. So I wrote things down as we went. We'll go back over the 5 lists.
Keep that for whatever page we come up with out of this.
Number 1, if you're trying to reinvent discussions here, is first acknowledge the assumptions. Number 2 then is deny the ones that are going to get in the way. Number 3 is decide what you want to cultivate, right? Pick what you're trying to get the students to discuss about and be very conscientious about it. 3, remember you're not the key to the content in the discussion, and you don't have to be the one driving from those strong prompts anymore. You can let them generate the content. But 5, remember you are the key to the community development. You are the key to the modeling of professional practice. So make sure you do show up in the discussion itself as it goes.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic. I'm holding on to those because I like that piece. And as you guys can tell, I mean, Will is obviously passionate about this topic. But I think it's important because it's a huge part of online learning right now. If we're honest, especially in online learning and hybrid, like if you're talking about like a blended hybrid course, like that's happening there too. But I feel the same pain. I feel frustration with the way discussions play. Because I'll be honest, in our environment, it's a lot of that. It's like, here's, post this many words first, then at least like 2 replies by the end of the week, and that type of stuff. And that's not actually what discussion is. I mean, I take a lot of my lead from where we see discussioning happening at other places, like social media or other places online, where that's not how that works. I mean, people don't here, I'm going to give you some do, and I don't read their whole post. But people are like, here's my 500 word thought on this. No, they're back and forth. And that does create some bad posts because they're giving like 4 words to an idea that probably deserves more.
Right.
But thinking about, I think what even came out of what you're talking about, thinking about how you can break out the discussion, not being this giant piece of text where they give feedback, but actual back and forth. And I think providing some of those guide rails for students to do that, like to your point, you have to have this, like when I say have a prompt, you have to have this like magical prompt that's huge. It's a whole bunch of answer these 12 questions. But do have like a guide rail of what they're trying to do. Like if they're trying to analyze a text or what they're doing, get them to a place where they have to post an opinion or post a thought or an analysis so that there can be conversation around that. And the expectation not being post 10 responses by this, but the expectation being that you should be engaged in this discussion and interacting. And I know there's a middle ground between some of it because there's the reality of what we deal with, that like there's a reason we have post this many times because sometimes students won't. And if there aren't guidelines on it. But I agree to that. I think my other thing I would add to what Will's thrown in there is just that like thinking about how, and this is my one problem with discussions in general that I don't think is going to be fixed in this conversation. Let me just stipulate that. I think we need to find a better way of integrating discussions with the content we're doing throughout the week. I see a lot of like, here's, read these 5 things, do these 5 assignments, and here's a discussion on these two videos. but where was the discussion around the content that was happening the rest of the week?
Yeah.
And I think that's why we feel like it's lost, because the discussion in a classroom, yes, sometimes is focused discussion. Other times it's integrated discussion around what we're learning. And that's not happening right now. Now, I don't have a perfect solution for that, because LMSs that we function in right now that use discussion tools, they do a crappy job of doing that. I'm not trying to get us no conversations or sponsorships for these LMSs. I'm going to say across the board, all of you, you're not doing a great job right now of that.
Right.
So we have to find ways to replicate that in that space. But yeah, you got me thinking about some ideas of just like, how do we get them not posting big pieces of content in the beginning, but actually get integrated discussion going on? And how can you as an instructor think through, like, to Will's point, your prompt isn't the key in there, but your interaction is key to what's happening. Like, how can you look at a discussion and say, you know what, Joe over here had a great statement about this that kind of applies to what Kim is, I don't know where I'm getting these names from. What Kim is over here posting about things. He should mention something about this. Why don't I, call him out? No, not mentioning thing would be great. But like, how do I bring that student in to comment on what they've been doing? Because that's the other thing. Generating that conversation, you're going to be going with that. So I really like what you threw out there. I think that piece too about just identifying what you're going for. Yeah. If you know what you're going for in the discussion, how can you guide them towards that? And how can a discussion is not just a good prompt, it's guiding throughout the discussion. How can I guide the conversation to be that? And don't expect them to post. I've had people before who are like, here, post a 2-page paper to lead off this discussion. And then post like, no, that's not how discussions work.
I might say, like, in that same moment, Josh, there's an opportunity there for folks to start maybe more like what we're suggesting, more smaller, short form stuff, have it be more discursive. Like, I say, you say, I say, you say, right? But it doesn't mean you couldn't scaffold the experience so that the posts do get longer by the end of the semester.
That's true.
Like, I'm not against there being longer form conversation, but the whole idea of having a student post 3 paragraphs worth of content means that there was no opportunity for them to be interrupted in the thought. Or for someone to maybe on the spot change their opinion before they fully formed it, which is, I think, a healthy part of discourse. So if we can get them doing shorter form earlier, we can expect them to do longer form by the end of the semester.
And right there, you're talking a good practical. I love this. This is a good practical idea of, like, because we love scaffolding in our work environments, right? So but what would it look like to say, okay, maybe you were going to give them 5 different questions that they had to process. What would it look like to break that up a little bit more? What would it look like to have them process maybe the first question or two and have to respond? And I'm not saying post the first post to the 2 questions, then by Wednesday post the other 2 questions. I'm saying, like, have separate discussions for these things.
Yeah.
Have people have to stop and think through other people's stuff during that process. Because that's what you want out of a discussion. You want the back and forth. And I think that's what we've lost in a discussion. We've, understandably, especially in higher ed, have not known how to handle the discussion. And so our response has been, well, I know how to make them write a paragraph, and I know I can get them to write another paragraph back. So that's what we're going to do. And meanwhile, other tech companies are laughing because they're like, that's not a discussion. That's not people discussing. That's people posting papers to each other in a reply form. So,
thank you. Text-based analysis or response. Yeah, exactly.
So, practical idea out of what Will's talking about. Take some of those ideas. Think about that too. Like, look at some of, if you've done discussions before, take a look and see, is there a way I could have broken that up into smaller pieces and generated more discussion around the smaller pieces, scaffolding out that discussion. Even if it's like scaffolding out 2 different discussions in a week about some stuff, just so that you're focusing the conversations in those discussions to get more conversation happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Josh, I think one of the things we need to think about here that's really important is how we can increase or otherwise transform discussions into something of greater value. And actually that would be to parlay it into greater value, right? That's the direct translation or definition.
That was I'm gonna be honest, that was not one of your stronger transitions.
Bummer. I literally
maybe I'm just not appreciating it.
It's a whole thing. It's fine. I was trying to think. I was like, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to make this work? Yeah, well, you win some, you lose some.
Somebody listening, maybe that was awesome. Josh is a jerk.
So like, how did he get there? Oh, parlay, parsnip, parsley, parlay. Damn to the depths, whoever thought of the word parlay. So, Pirates of the Caribbean coming out of me. Sorry. Our app this week is a tool called Parlay Ideas. And of course, I actually was trying to use the definition of parlay there in my transition because I was like, what? How do we capture this? What is this doing? Parlay, right, is to extend or transform to a greater value something. So they're saying ideas, and this is actually a great point back to number 3 of my top 5 things to do. What are you trying to cultivate in your discussion? Well, Parlay Ideas is saying ideas are the crux of discourse. That's their philosophy. And I think it's a good one, but I'm not saying it's the end all be all. So their platform is a digital discussion tool. And it's got a lot of features to help take control of and to monitor and improve the discussion process online, all at the mission of improving the discourse of ideas. Like, their tool is called Parlay, but their website and their brand is Parlay Ideas. I really like that. I think it's important to keep that in mind as you're considering it. Now, Josh, what do you think? You're brand new to this one. I do have some things to backfill, but what are some initial responses as you were looking at this in preparation for the episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I will be honest in this episode. Will definitely knows a bit more about this tool than I do. I've not gotten a chance to play with it a bunch. But I think it's interesting. Immediately, I think it's interesting how they've tried to cut out some of the prompt work. And like, even for the people, like, I'm playing around right now, even for people replying, you can add in like prompt ideas for this. Like, it gives kind of a direction to how you respond in a discussion. Which I think is kind of cool. They're going against some of the grain of other discussions where they're like, we don't want to give them too much because they may not spend enough time on writing something. And they're really like, we're trying to take that away because we're more focused on them interacting on ideas, and even being able to kind of like interrupt. I like their idea of kind of like this, they call it a round table type of discussion feature there. So I think that's kind of cool. I also am kind of a fan of that they have some features that also try to change live discussion too, that can integrate, which is something a little bit different. Yeah. I think those are some of my initial reactions on what they're doing.
So a friend, I was telling her about our upcoming podcast. She didn't even know about it yet. Thank you, Mariah, for this episode this week. But she was telling me about how she uses this in her K-12 classroom. And one of the things that really stood out to me was about the front end and back end. On the front end, like you were just saying, Josh, it's providing a lot of help to the instructor creating the prompts and managing the actual discussion. So really what it's doing is relieving you of a lot of the scaffolding effort. Like what Josh was saying there is like, if I hit reply as a student, it actually gives me 3 suggestions on how I might reply. Like the system, and it might be the type of, prompt we chose to use as an example, but it provides this to me. I agree/disagree with this post because blank. Like it's telling the student, start this kind of post, or you could try it one of 2 other ways. So it's really important that it, I think, relieves the work on the instructor of building all this scaffolding. Right? You just have to put in your prompt in one sense, like what the content is of your prompt, but it helps to build out all of the interactions and how folks should be working with one another.
And to that comment, like what Will was talking about, we have the tool open up on our other screens right now while we're kind of looking at it. And like the ability to do that, right, is I just created something and I set a couple prompt ideas, but I can actually check off other things I want them to do. Like if I want them to, they have kind of some pre-written ones, but what's really interesting is you can actually create, they call it an assessment point, for the students, it seems like in here. So like you can actually create this as an option that shows up for them when they're going to reply as some of these prompts. And why I think this is interesting is like, to your point, Will, I think instructors will spend a lot of time like writing out instructions with clear prompts and things of what they're going to do. Here you can just kind of integrate it into the discussion, like and kind of integrate what you want them to respond to. And how, in a very interesting way. I think like that captures me right away. It's kind of a cool feature to how you're doing with discussion. They're already trying to lean you in a certain direction so that you can get students moving in a certain direction for conversation. Like it's trying to enable better conversation.
Yeah, it's really cool with that. And so then the other side of it though is the back end, like the reporting. So it tracks a lot of great data, and I get leery of tracking and data, and of course the privacy involved in that, but this isn't stuff like the student was in for 15 minutes and they logged in at 10 o'clock and left at 10:15. So like, it's not that it probably is that data in there, but the point of the data is like who talked to who talked how much, who asked questions. It's got all this kind of data that I think is really valuable for the teacher on like what actually happened in the digital discourse. What bums me out 10 out of 10 times when an instructor tells me their participation grade is based on their opinions, or they don't even say it that way, but they'll say, oh yeah, my participation grade, that's just what the students do in class. Okay, how do you measure that? What things do they need to do in class? Do you watch all the students equitably? Like insert any number of questions that I might put there. 10 out of 10 times I'm disappointed by the answer I receive about how an instructor keeps a participation grade. This tool, you could just review an end of session report and have your participation grade right there. You would see who spoke how many times, who cross-referenced one another. It gives you a lot of like visual data and report data where you would have proof that they engaged in the discussion. And like Josh was saying, this can be asynchronous, or they have a live discussion feature. Like you're actually designed to do one and keep it up while the students are talking live. And that's great because it's one of those tools that provides us the evidence of student learning, right? We know, and I believe in kind of the art of science of education. Like, I think they were learning, and I think they did well. I'm okay with that. I'm not against that. But if I can have data to prove they did it, I'm for that. I think it's all the better to know that I have proof.
Well, and the other practical piece too is getting back to what you were talking about. Like if you as an instructor can see who replied to who's been replying the most. Yes, okay, there's an element of where you're tracking attendance. There's also an element of where you as the instructor are doing your job in a way that's different now than you could in class, where like you can identify online, okay, you know what, so-and-so has not really been interacting very much, or these two people have been interacting a ton. How can I get them interacting with other people, or what have they been talking about? If you see, I'm going to pull out some random names again. Susie and Tom, okay? They're interacting a lot. Like, if I was thinking about this from a discussion perspective, if they're going back and forth a lot in discussion, okay, what are they talking about? What conversations are they having right now that keep going back and forth so much? Is there a way I can generate other students into that conversation? Like, is there a way that I can expand the discussion? Because they might have something really cool that they're talking about. And that's something that I think this Parlay tool gives you that some other regular discussions are difficult to do, because they're automatically tracking those interactions in a different way. And I will say, guys, looking at the tool, it's very pretty. Okay, so that's the other thing I do like about it. It gives some good beautiful colors. There's something I'm an aesthetics guy. I love when the tool looks good. I hate some of these ad tools that come out and they look like they're from the 90s. They may do fantastic things, but I swear if I'm looking like I'm at Windows XP, that's gonna make me sad. Okay, so they do a really cool job of coloring in some other. Like the way that you look at this is really cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, this one first and foremost comes from a friend's recommendation. She's been using it. Now, one of the things we do need to keep in mind is that its freemium element is not very robust. What did you say, Josh? I think it's 12 round tables that you're limited to.
Yeah, so I took a look at their pricing. It's 12 round tables for the free thing. So they're context, guys. Round tables is what they're referring to as discussions. Okay, so like they give it a name because every tool needs a cool name for whatever they're calling it. And maybe they're trying to. I think that's also because they're trying to reconceptualize the discussion, so they're giving it a different name.
They want it to feel different.
They have some thoughts behind why they're giving it, so I'll give them credit there. But it's 12 for that, and then from there, it starts to get not so great. It's like $125 for like a single user thing, and you get unlimited, so it would work great. Where I can immediately see a problem is you and I were taking a look at it. Institutionally, there's no way I'm getting this through in my area. I don't know if you guys have a lot of money sitting around at your institutions that you're at, but it was like what did we say it was? Like $3 per
user
student.
Per
student.
Yeah.
So like immediately, we were talking about this before the episode recording. Put that into perspective. You got 2,000 students. Well, it's not too bad. That's like $6,000 a year for this tool. You got 10,000. You look at like $30,000 a year for a discussion tool.
Right.
I was joking beforehand, but it's a very big reality try selling this to an administrator.
Yeah. It would have to be. It would have to for it to work. It'd have to be a custom quote. Like it couldn't be that much expensive.
Or it'd have to be for something specific. Like it'd have to be for like you get it for specific courses, and you would add those students in just for those courses. But I'm just immediately thinking like, hey, would you pay $30,000 a year for this discussion tool? Don't we have discussions in our learning management system?
That to be the first response.
Yeah, but those suck. Could we get this one? It's got cool graphs. Like I'm not gonna be able to sell that. So the freemium tool is slightly limited. That's not a stopping point. I know your friend used it in a K-12 environment and she just
had to delete
the discussions. I know some higher ed instructors who are not trying to implement this across online courses that could probably implement this on their own pretty well. I couldn't do this in the online programs that I work in. Like I couldn't implement it across multiple courses. It just wouldn't work. Yeah. That's the unfortunate part about it. But
well, I think that this is a pretty thick episode, and thank you, Josh, but also forgive me for getting me up on a soapbox. It's something I care very much about, and I think that one of the values, of course, in the long term of a tool that's good like Roundtable, cultivating good discussions is it makes us better at working with one another and being able to just be friends and to be communal and to be professionals and colleagues in the workforce. If we can have discourse, we can do a whole lot of things. So I think I see it as kind of a civics element, and I think there's a very important reason to do this well and improve our discussions moving forwards.
So absolutely. So that is, I think, all we can give to this conversation for now. I think Will could talk about this for another 4 days or longer. So feel free to reach out to him if you want some more ideas on the discussion thing. I know he's happy to talk about it. I am also happy to talk about it. But so that's Parlay. Those are discussions, guys. Thanks again for another great week. Hope to think through how you're doing discussions. And thank you for joining us just for a little bit more to talk about how we use technology, harness it well in our classrooms, virtual or physical. So see you guys.
See ya.